comment, that would be helpful. And be sure to mute, please. At noon, let me just get my notes real ready real quick here. Cool, we got recordings, we got Chad, there's Courtney, there's John, Mark, still waiting on a few more. I didn't hear from the others about not joining Chad. Oh, there we go. We got Scott. I think Sherry and Joe would be the last two. Did you, I'll leave it up to you, Tad. Do you want to give another minute or two, or?
Yeah, we can wait another couple minutes. Have you reached out to them?
Let me check my phone right now. I'll double check with them. I haven't heard anything otherwise. Let me confirm. Is Joe? It's Joe and Sherry. Yeah, sometimes sometimes my emails go to spam because I send so many emails out. There's Joe. Thanks, Tiffany. Let me just give a quick call to Sherry here, Chad, see if she has an issue.
Yep. While Andy is calling Sherry, maybe we could go through our introductions now, and once Sherry joins, then she can introduce herself as well. Does that work for folks? Great. Seeing some thumbs up. Bill, welcome. Great to have you. Looking forward to hearing more about your background, but from what I do know, I think that you'll be a great addition to this committee. So my name is Chad Washington, and I work for the Oregon Forest Industries Council as Director of Forest Protection, and have been on this committee since we started. I'll pass it to the Vice Chair, Mark Stern, who's also been here for that long.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Hi, Bill. Welcome. My name is Mark Stern, and as Chad mentioned, I serve as Vice Chair on the committee. As I think a lot of you know, there's 7 people on this committee. 3 of them represent the timber industry, 3 of them represent conservation interests, and the 7th slot comes from representing the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund, which PFA is sort of umbrellaed with. So to that extent, I represent the slot provided for the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund here. My background in Oregon, I worked for the Nature Conservancy for 25 plus years, and in my last stint spent a lot of time working on forests, wildfire, more the dry forest types of the east side and southwest Oregon, but that's some of the background that I bring to the table here. So welcome.
Jock, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself next?
I'm Jock Dalton. I represent the Oregon Small Woodlands on the board. 3rd generation family forest owner. My wife's fifth generation family forest owner. So we're the small woodlands people.
Great. Thank you, Chuck. Before we go any further, Mark Bell with Polk's Soil and Water Conservation District, could you mute, please? And next we'll go to Joe Liebezeit.
Hello, everybody. My name's Joe Liebezeit. I work for Alliance of Oregon, doing policy work. My training is as a scientist originally, but more and more spend my time in Salem. And we are one of the original signatories of the Private Forest Accord. At the time, I think we were called Portland Audubon.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Courtney.
Hi, Courtney Griesel. I work for Sierra Pacific Industries. We're a family-owned wood products company and timberland owner. We were also a signatory to the Private Forest Accord, but I don't have the experience that Mark and Chad do as founders on this committee. So have gotten to come on in the last couple cycles and just enjoy learning from folks and kind of working on these reviews together. So it's a pretty, it's a heavy lift, but it's well worth the time and engagement that we do together.
Thank you, Courtney. And Scott Lightcap.
Well, Bill Brignon, hello. For those that don't know, Bill and I worked together for, gosh, a decade on the land management side, public land management. So he and I are very familiar. We had a nice good cop, bad cop routine, and I'll let you guys figure out who was the good cop, who was the bad cop. But Bill, on this committee, I kind of joined the same time as Courtney did. And so I think that we're coming up 2 years or 2+ years on it. And I believe I represent the conservation side, Trout Unlimited. So kind of an informal rep for TU on that conservation side.
Great. Thank you, Scott. And Sherry is our final committee member. She's not joined us yet. Is that right, Andy? I don't see her on the screen.
Yeah, I couldn't get a hold of her right now, unfortunately.
Okay, great. And any other ex officio members that would like to introduce themselves to Bill, if you don't already know Bill, and then Bill will have you go last if that's okay. So, Mark Grenbremmer, do you want to start?
Hey, Bill. Hey, everyone. Mark Renbemmer, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, located in Southwest Oregon in Medford. I represent OWEB on the committee, and as was mentioned, ex officio means non-voting, but I believe technically we're still committee members. Andy, you could probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think
you're right.
we still are. So, so while we don't vote, I hopefully we carry a voice. Let's see. I've been with OWEB since the beginning, which was in 1999 when OWEB became an agency. Before that, I worked for GWEB, and before that, the Oregon Watershed Health Program, and before that, ODFW. So, been around the country a little bit. But anyway, welcome, Bill. Looking forward to learning more about you.
Great. And then, Andy, I don't see Jennifer Weichel on either.
She's on fire duty. She's with ODF Bill. She's out on a fire call right now for the week.
She's probably not too far from me then, probably at the East Evans fire.
Yeah, I think she is. Unfortunately.
Andy, are there any other ex officios other than Bill?
Just so you're aware, Bill, we have a vacancy from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service right now, but Kate Wells with NOAA or NIMS attends, and sometimes Sam in her vacancy. I don't see Sam here today. Might be joining on later. I'm not sure at this point.
Great. And with that, Bill, welcome, and please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Chad, and everyone. Yeah, so Bill Brignon, I work for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm taking over for Sarah Gregory, who was in this role previously. Let's see, before coming to Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, I've spent about 24 years in the Pacific Northwest as a fish biologist, 14 working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on various recovery aspects. there, and then moved to the U.S. Forest Service, where I spent 8 years, and that's where I was able to rub shoulders with bad cop Scott Lightcap, just so you all know who's the good cop and the bad cop there. But after 8 years with the Forest Service, I moved over to Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. My title here is Program Manager for Inland Fish Management. So we help with planning, policy, and all things regarding interior fish of the state of Oregon. Got a bachelor's degree from Purdue University and a master's and PhD from Oregon State University. So go Beavs.
Great. Thank you for that, Bill.
Yeah, good to meet you all.
Andy, I think with that, we can officially call to order our meeting. And if you'd lead us through a roll call.
Yes, I will call your name off. As usual, please respond in the affirmative if you're present. Chad Washington.
Here.
Joe Liebezeit.
Here.
Scott Lightcap.
Here.
Courtney Griesel.
Here.
Jock Dalton.
Here.
Sherry Johnson. Mark Stern.
Here.
Mark Grinbremer.
Here.
Jennifer Weichel. Kate. Is Kate Thompson here in substitute? Okay. Kate Wells. Bill. Bill, could I get a correct pronunciation of your last name?
Brignon
Okay, there we go. Bill Brignon.
here.
All right, Chad. We got everyone here. I'm going to hand it back to you to move forward with the meeting.
Great. Andy provided us with the meeting materials back in late June. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda? See heads nodding. Any requests to add items, change the agenda? Okay. Seeing and hearing none, Andy, I think we can consider the agenda approved and move into the public comment. I think this is our first time being behind for public comment. So thanks to the public for sticking with us, and we can open it up now. Andy,
All
please
right.
receive the comment.
Thank you, Chad. All right, so you can have an opportunity for public comment. Please raise your hand virtually and we'll call on you to unmute and come on camera if you would like. You have 3 minutes for your public comment. I will give you a 30-second warnings. I will interrupt you, but just to say you got 30 seconds to let you know. All right, I see Mark Hudson. Feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Mark Hudson, the Conservation Director of Pacific Forest Trust. Talking on a couple topics today. First, wanted to talk about the definitions of forest land and riparian area. SB 1501 allows for conservation easements on lands other than forest land to protect riparian areas. And we think that the definition of forest land and lands to protect riparian areas is pretty critical. I think probably the conversation today. Riparian areas themselves are pretty narrow, expensive to legally survey, prone to complex boundaries that kind of heighten the risk of conservation easement violations. And easements restricting them provide little financial incentives to the landowner because of how Oregon land use laws work. So we kind of request the committee to consider definition 109 under the PFA of the riparian area, which is basically the ground along a state water where vegetation and microclimate are influenced by year-round or seasonal water or high water tables, and soils exhibit some hydric characteristics. But key, to the program definition of what is eligible, we think that areas to protect riparian areas or lands to protect riparian areas should include those areas which have a demonstrable or significant, surface sheet flow or groundwater connection to that riparian area as being the area of eligibility for the program. Regarding forest land, we urge the committee to use the definition ORS 527.620, which defines forest lands as trees grown for commercial harvest. This, we think, would meet the statutory requirement of not doing forest land, while still allowing for things such as riparian forests, which are going to be critical towards meeting the covered species benefits, still being allowed within the program's eligibility. Another topic to discuss, the current conservation easement prohibits pretty much all commercial activities at the end of the day. And even if there are proceeds to be made, they're required to be reinvested in the property. I mean, to be frank, we're pretty skeptical that a landowner will ever agree to that. And alternatively, as a land trust, it puts us in a highly awkward position of not only monitoring the land, which is pretty typical, but also monitoring the landowner spreadsheets if we are to be
You have
monitoring.
30 seconds remaining.
Thanks, Andy. Commercial returns. Last, regarding the management plan, we strongly discourage the committee from approving a management plan structure which creates new requirements over time. When those requirements are not included in the easement or upfront during the appraisal process, they're not able to be appraised and included in the payment to the landowner, and can create new and unknowable financial expectations for the landowner over time. We just feel this is going to significantly disincentivize participation, and frankly, if a landowner does it, has the possibility of creating resentment. So there you go. There's my comments, and thank you everybody for your time.
Thank you, Mark. We appreciate it. Next, I have, is it Keola Swanson?
Thanks, Andy.
Keola.
Yeah.
Keola?
Hi, folks. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead and your time's going to start now. Thank you.
Great. Chair Washington, Vice Chair Stern, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Keola Swanson, and I'm here in my capacity as a board member for the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts, an organization which represents more than 30 land trusts and conservation nonprofits working across the state. I'm also a program manager for the Conservation Fund. We are a nationally accredited land trust with a 40-year history, and in that time, we've conserved more than 9 million acres across the country. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some comments here today as this committee continues its important work on the Land Transactions Manual for the PFA Grants Program. I appreciate the collaboration and the committee's commitment to creating a program that will achieve meaningful uplift for the covered species. We encourage the committee to structure this program so that the conservation easements protect riparian resources rather than requiring conservation easements are limited exclusively to riparian acreage. This approach is important because it ensures the program is feasible and practical to implement. You have to have the easements mesh with the legal lot and land title system, and property boundaries rarely align neatly with ecological features. Conserving only riparian acreage can make conservation easements impractical for willing landowners and applicants to implement, monitor, or steward. We're also grateful that the program does not require a match for projects and recognize that it can become the match for a variety of eligible matching grant programs. As the committee works to finalize this program, we encourage you to maintain that flexibility and remain open to the wide range of federal, state, and private funding sources that applicants assemble to complete conservation projects. Conservation easements and land acquisition projects are rarely funded by a single grant program. Land trusts often have to bring together a variety of funding sources to complete these projects, and we encourage the committee to continue to interpret the ability of the PFA mitigation grant program to contribute broadly toward other conservation efforts in the state. Thank you again for your hard work and dedication in crafting this program. I appreciate how much work you all have been doing over a number of years. Appreciate the opportunity to comment and look forward to continued partnership. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me reset the timer. Carson, if you're ready to come on camera and unmute, your time will start. Feel free to go ahead.
Thanks, Andy, and thank you all. So Chair Washington, Vice Chair Stern, and committee members. My name is Carson Kendrick. I'm the Conservation Director for the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts. COLT represents 32 member land trusts, soil and water conservation districts, and conservation organizations who work in Oregon with private landowners, communities, and indigenous tribes to protect, restore, and steward land. I also want to echo Keola and Mark's thanks for all your dedication and work to this program, and for ODFW staff who have been great partners and collaborators as you work through the land transactions portion, which is a heavy lift. These documents before you today will hopefully create a foundation for a program we all hope will serve Oregon for years to come. And we really appreciate the work that's gone into it. As you do work through these documents, we would encourage and offer our members and for continued collaboration through specifically the creation of a working group that could be comprised of ODFW staff, committee members, and external partners that have conservation easement expertise to help refine these final documents and make sure that the program is practical for applicants and delivers lasting outcomes. In addition, the PFA authors report does state that easements on covered lands may be useful to help small forest landowners comply with new standards. So we would respectfully ask that you include that as an intended and explicitly recognized use within the manual and provide a pathway for projects that support those smaller landowners. And finally, I just want to comment on the valuation criteria in your materials. So while covered species are represented as the largest individual scoring category in that document, they only currently account for 20% of the total available points. So a project could potentially receive relatively few points for covered species benefits while still remaining competitive with other criteria. And because the primary purpose of this program is to advance those conservation outcomes for covered species, we would respectfully recommend increasing the weight of this category to better align with the project scoring and program goals. So that's my comments. Thank you again for your partnership and time. And we just look forward to watching your discussion today and continued collaboration. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the time and the comments. At this time, if there's anyone else that would like to provide comments, please feel free to raise your hand virtually. And just for the public record, we did receive written testimony and public comment that has been distributed to the committee yesterday morning, and it was posted online at pfagrants.com along with all the other meeting materials that we'll be discussing today. Chad, I don't see anyone else requesting public comment at this time. I'm happy to hand it back to you.
Great. Looks like we can just play ping pong here, Andy, because I'm going to hand it right back to you for your staff presentation.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I am not looking at the agenda. Let me share screen here. Chad, do you see the screen online?
I do. And before we continue, Andy, I think it would be helpful for the folks on this meeting. It looks like, you know, in the end of our agenda, we do have the opportunity to provide public comment at the end of the meeting too. So let's plan to have public comment available for those that are on the call that may want to weigh in after the discussion, to have that same 3-minute slot at the end of the meeting, if that works for everybody.
Okay. Sounds good, Chad. Oh.
Let's see, Mark, you've got your hand up, and I can't see if it's Stern or Grandbemmer.
Yeah, Mark Stern here. Yeah, Chad, I was just checking in to see if and when we might have an opportunity to ask questions of any of the people who provided public testimony, and what your thoughts was when that might happen in the meeting flow.
Great, thanks, Mark. If there are questions from the committee to the folks that submitted public comment, either written or in person or virtual here, we can have that opportunity during the document review and just ask that engagement happens to clarify questions from the committee to the comments themselves. So if that opportunity comes up, that would be the time between 12:20 and 2.
Great, thanks.
All right, Chad, are you ready for me to reshare and hop into my staff presentation, which I promise will be as brief as possible, and we can get into the meat of it?
That sounds great, Andy. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. There you guys are. All right. Apologies, scrolling whichever direction. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. For the record, my name is Andy Spurker. I'm the Private Forest Accord Grant Coordinator here at ODF&W. Today, I'll provide a brief overview of the modifications made since the previous iteration of the Conservation Easement Guidelines, followed by a summary of the submission process and timeline over the next few months. All an iteration and a draft. I'll work through presenting the next few slides. Then I'll be happy to answer any questions from the committee if there's any. Otherwise, we can kind of move on with the agenda. That said, let's get right into it. Over the past month, or 2 months now, comprehensive legal, administrative, and public feedback was integrated into the guidance document to increase the functionality and clarity for both the agency and our applicants. Public feedback centered primarily around match guidance, public notice standards, management plan parameters, and eligible project costs. We did some collaborative benchmarking alongside OWEB staff to cross-reference administrative procedures and update formal procedural requirements expected of similar state programs around Oregon. We updated the reporting requirements for this portion of the grant program. It's different than the other restoration-focused funding effort. We require once-a-year reports due to the department in perpetuity by the grantee for the conservation easement. Every 5 years following the execution of the conservation easement, we will require the grantee to submit an update to the property management plan for 20 years. We've added clarity to the submission protocol, outlining all mandatory deliverables due during the application phase, post-award tracking, contract execution, and post-easement finalization. The conservation easement template and draft agreement provide detailed foresight regarding program expectations for future applicants. All necessary appendices and baseline documentation requirements for this guidance document have been nearly completed or are almost done as of today's presentation. While this has been a significant standardization process over the last 2 months, the program remains open to receiving additional feedback and edits from the public and, of course, the advisory committee. So that said, let's get on to how let's go to an overview of how an applicant will apply and what it looks like. So the next 3 slides review all the documents that are required or may be required based on the transaction at 3 different times in the process. Those being at the time of the application, the time of post-award or agreement with the department, and at the time of the execution date of the conservation easement. For the most part, as I've said, I've drafted nearly all of these documents on the next 3 slides for our presentation today. I don't plan to review each of these documents in detail now or go over each of these in the list, but I'm hoping that these next 3 slides demonstrate the breadth of the effort that we're going. It's not an easy lift, and we've worked diligently with other state agencies to best align with standard practices and try to meet the committee's intent and public comment. None of these lists are set in stone, and if the committee wants to move a requirement from one step of the submission process to another, that's okay. Here's a list of all the forms that are due post-award, during, and after the grant agreement process. This is the final set of forms due at the time of the conservation easement execution. One thing of importance to know is that at the time of the application, applicants are required to submit a property management plan draft that will summarize major sections of the plan. But since creating comprehensive property management plans requires substantial investments, we don't require a final plan to be completed and approved by ODFW until 18 months after the effective date of the conservation easement. At least that's what's in the draft. So like I said a few minutes ago, we spent the last 6 to 8 weeks comprehensively updating these guidance documents for conservation easements to better align with statewide standards and, of course, incorporate committee and general public feedback. This is my last slide. I want to walk through a possible roadmap for the conservation easement portion of this PFA grant program. Of course, it's just tentative off of today's conversation. Our goal today is to align the workflow over the next few months, leading to a launch this fall with our regular solicitation. Over the spring and throughout June, staff has worked on a heavy lifting of document preparation, as you are now aware of from my previous slides. We've successfully reconstructed our project agreement templates, management plan structure, clarified our core administrative guidelines for conservation easements, and created a substantial amount of other relevant attachments and appendices required for this new funding pathway in PFA grants. During this time, we've also worked to integrate feedback from all different sources. And as we've headed into July, our primary milestone was a PFA committee meeting taking place today with a big goal of distributing all revised drafts weeks prior to this meeting, which we accomplished. I've also taken the time to post any additional written public comments or committee track changes online at pfagrants.com ahead of today's meeting if it came in after our initial press release or public notices went out a few weeks back. Following today's meetings, I'll be trying my best to track all changes and public comments to these documents moving forward. After today's discussions, August could be dedicated to fine-tuning the application mechanics. I'll continue to work with the advisory committee to review and refine the application and scoring process. We will, of course, accept public comments throughout this entire process from everyone involved. I appreciate everyone's time and patience as we roll through this out and continue to revise documents. I know it's a heavy lift, and we want to thank everyone for being involved. We're still in drafting mode here, And if I haven't said it enough, I encourage open and honest feedback from all stakeholders in this process. With that, Chad, that's all I had to say. There's a staff report with more details online at pfagrants.com. I'm happy to hand it back to you, Chad. Oh, you're muted, Chad.
Oh, yep, got it. Thank you for that, Andy. Very helpful. And for our discussion, do you have the documents that you sent out handy and available to share on the screen as we discuss?
Yes, I do. I have the primary guidance document ready to go right now, and I can pull up the other ones as ready.
All right. We have some subcategories under this agenda item, including riparian definition discussion, match discussion, applicant eligibility, and then review of any public comment. So I guess it would be helpful if you could pull up the current working definition of riparian, and we can start with that.
Unfortunately, we weren't able to get the current definition of riparian definition available today for this meeting. We tried to get it going, but we just weren't able to pull that out right now.
Can you articulate more about why that is and what would need to change? What's in the way and kind of what gets us there? It's kind of an important piece.
We're just consulting right now with Department of Justice and internally, trying just to get a pretty comprehensive definition of that. So we're trying our best to move it forward, but we're just still waiting on it. So I apologize for that.
Mark Stern, you've got.
Hey, Andy, what is the PFA? And I don't have it right in front of me, but section 109 definition of riparian, where does that come from? Is that in one of the 1501 or?
I can't recall. Was that what was brought up in the public comment?
Yes.
I don't have that off the top of my notes, Mark. I don't know if we want to, I can search for it and find it in the meantime.
Well, I searched on it the other day. I think it comes up under ODF and WPFA, but.
All right. Well, I can take a quick second and look at it right now.
In the meantime, Courtney, you have your hand up.
Mark, I was listening to you and I missed, because I think 109 defines the setback, or defines the riparian area, right? Not riparian setback.
Yeah, I think it's just a general description. I'm Googling it and it says, makes it sound like it's a private forest accord definition 109. Sorry, it's a little hard to read.
Is this I don't know if we want to ask a member of the public to clarify or not, but I found definition 109 under the Secretary of State filing for Oregon Department of Forestry. This might be what we're looking at for riparian area.
Andy, before we go too far down this, do you say you had to wait on DOJ to offer a definition?
We're on
DOJ. The definition here, are we going to have to still wait for DOJ to weigh in? I guess, is there any way to make a decision?
We don't have to make any decisions today, no. But we could definitely bring forward what the committee has, and it could be helpful that we can bring this forward, talk with DOJ and our internal staff to say this is what the committee might feel. Looks like Sarah's coming online. I don't know if she wants to add to that or not.
Hi, everyone. Sarah Ray, Habitat Division Administrator of VFW. Good afternoon. On the riparian, we have collected quite a bit of input that we're still synthesizing. There's, there was the original draft language, I believe, Andy, that's in the guidance document for riparian. There was some suggestions to look at ODF's definition of riparian. We've also had a suggestion to look at ODFW's definition of riparian that exists in our Riparian Lands Tax Incentive Program administrative rules. And then there's also just been, from a few different places, I think just some recommendations, maybe it was in the public comments as well, some recommendations to just consider a slightly broader definition that considers more than just like the ribbon stream, but other types of water bodies, anywhere where the interface of vegetation and soil is influenced by water. And so we're still just in synthesis mode, given that there's been a lot of interest and a lot of recommendations. And so if the committee has also given this some thought and has some suggestions for us to continue to look at, that would be good. The one piece that we've asked for DOJ's help on is just confirming our assumptions, which is that us providing a working definition in this guidance document won't cause confusion with other definitions that exist in administrative rule. So we're just really, it's not so much that we're still just waiting for DOJ, it's that we're just kind of still in synthesis mode and collecting feedback on what should be some of the considerations that we might include in a working definition for the purposes of this guidance document. If that's helpful.
That's helpful. It is very helpful, Sarah. I guess my initial instinct would be to just go with the ODF definition of riparian areas. But then when I think about that further, the fact that these are for non-forest lands, maybe it doesn't make sense to use an ODF definition if that's not where the conservation easements are to apply. And it would maybe make more sense to use an ODF and W definition. But my question to you, Andy, was not, do we have to make a decision, but rather, can we make a decision? And it sounds like we cannot until DOJ approves that decision. Is that correct? We can recommend that we use the ODFW decision.
Yeah, I would say that's the pathway there, is we do a recommendation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like to open it up to the rest of the committee to talk a little further about the different definitions. It would be really helpful if we had the ODFW definition in front of us, Andy. Is that something that you can provide?
Yep. I'll work on it now so we can have both of them in front of us.
Well, you're working on that. Maybe we can have a discussion around match, eligible match, what the requirements are, how the scoring reflects match. So we did hear from the public that it is very helpful to have grant funding available that does not require match. I know that non-federal funding can be really critical to access other programs. That being said, I think projects that do have match maybe should score higher, but the eligibility piece, it sounds like it's a much more flexible program if we don't require match. So opening it up for discussion, Courtney, you've got your hand up. Mark, you've got yours next.
One piece kind of pulling us upward for just a minute in the bulleted list of things. I'd like to, if possible, just add a flag for a broader conversation on the criteria scoring as well to that list, just in the theme of us scheduling the last 90 minutes we have. On the match piece, I think we're not requiring match, correct? We are just, this is staying consistent with how we are scoring all applications under this grant, which is, so, okay. That's what I understood. I just suddenly, that conversation made me think, did I read this language wrong? Which is, it's not required, but we are consistently, when scoring, providing some additional value to those projects that have it. Because it says multiple things about the project.
That's right, Courtney. It's my understanding that if two identical projects came through, if one had match and the other didn't, the one with match would be given preference all other things held equal. Anything else, Courtney? Great. Mark Stern, and then Jock, I see your hand up next.
Yeah, I agree with where we've landed in not requiring match, and that's a change from the May version, so I appreciate that change. I also think since we're not requiring match, it's reasonable to allow other state funds, including ODF and W, to count as match, because I think it demonstrates coordination across programs for some mutual synergistic benefit. So I would agree with the suggestion that if there happens to be other ODF and W monies or other state monies, that they count as match as well for that. So I think that's headed in a good direction.
So Mark, when you say that, do you mean unsecured funds or where it's planned to be used as match, or?
Well, I
Can
think
you
that's another
give
whole
more
question
detail?
about whether funds are secured or requested or not secured. And I think we see that in our existing mitigation grants that they may say the funds are secured or they're pending. So obviously it's to the applicant's benefit to say the funds are secured, but we also realize that's not always the case because these funding cycles happen sequentially.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Jock, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I agree with the previous comments, but also I point out that right now is an example of how the funding sources vary. And when we do evaluate them, the timeliness of the action for the project is an important criteria that we should offset against the ability to have a match.
Could you offer a little bit more detail on that, Jock?
Well,
Just making sure that I'm tracking.
Let's say you've got a chance to affect a stream channel, and if we act now, then it can be done in an economical manner and create a improvement in habitat. If we don't, if we choose somebody else and this is delayed, and there is a good chance that it won't get acted on, and then it might be years or decades before it can be done again, is an example I can think of.
And then how would that be related to the match portion? Just to stay focused on this match discussion. So that's a timing issue.
It's a timing issue, but when you say prioritizing people with match, if you've got something that's important coming up and it doesn't have a match, it shouldn't be passed over because it doesn't have the match.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Jock. And I think that would naturally come out in the scoring process because those would not be like projects, right? Like projects would be everything is held equal. The one with match would be prioritized. And then it's in the scoring that the committee will have to decide if a project has match, will it be prioritized over one that doesn't, if the one that doesn't has timing issues or anything like that. I open that up for the committee to discuss, but I think that would likely be reflected in the scoring process.
That's what I would hope.
I'm seeing some heads nod. And anybody care to share any thoughts on that or just general agreement? Courtney?
Yeah, this reinforces why I think that broader system of scoring becomes an important discussion, because we've seen exactly what you just talked about happen, where match results in a point, but that urgency and that clarity of uplift of the project then results in points in other categories that boost it, because when we talk about it, this is showing kind of urgent and more assured outcomes or things. And so it quickly overrides the fact that there may or may not be match.
Yeah.
So I just am echoing kind of what you're saying and then doubling down on why I think talking about scoring in isolation of each category isn't as helpful as kind of looking at the whole picture. And I think even some of our public testimony was referring to a little bit of that.
Great. Mark Grinbremer?
Yeah, I guess it depends on, I think what I'm getting from the committee is when we're talking about match, the match that's being talked about is the, dollars to help with the easement acquisition cost. Hard dollars that would go to that, but in reality, projects, I think every project that comes and will come before this committee has match, and a lot of it may not be physical dollars, but it's a lot of, sweat and time and hard work by the applicant partners, landowners involved, agencies involved, all that time that goes into the project development, the project implementation, and then the post-implementation work could and should be counted as match. And so while it may not be match that is, a tangible dollar amount that's being contributed toward the actual cost, it is actual capital, people capital, time capital, sweat capital that goes into bringing a project forward. So we're not going to get any project that doesn't have some sort of match. It just may not be actual match for the acquisition portion of it.
That's a great comment, Mark. I do think, and Andy, you can correct me, but that we have in-kind contributions that qualify as match. Is that correct?
Yes, that can qualify as match also if they claim it.
So to Mark's point, as long as they are able to qualify, quantify the hours that they expect to expend, like there is a pathway to still count that as match and get the preference or the points associated as long as they do the work to demonstrate that.
Yes, if they choose to claim it, they can. Correct, for in-kind hours.
Does that get at what you were trying to speak to, Mark?
Yeah, I was just trying to make sure, because the way the conversation was, what I was translating it as was, hard cash dollars that would go towards the actual acquisition, or easement cost, versus there's a lot of, time and work that's going into project development and project management that is not those kind of dollars. So I just wanted to make sure that as we're having the conversation, I don't think we'll ever see a project that doesn't have matches if somebody wants to document it. It just may not be the actual, dollars for the actual cost of the easement. So,
Great.
yeah, good stuff.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Mark Stern, did you raise your hand or?
No, I'm good for the moment. Thanks.
Very good. So any other discussion around match? Are we as a committee comfortable with where we're at, saying we're not going to require match, but that we will count in-kind contributions as match? And that any project like for like that has match will be given preference to those that don't? And that'll happen in the scoring.
I'm good with that, just with the one caveat that all state funds are also eligible to be called out as match.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Sounds
That's
good.
what I was gonna add to that to discuss that. So thank you.
And I do see Joe has his hand up, so I want to make sure to hear from Joe.
Yeah, I'm good with that as well. I do wonder what amount of scoring will be provided for match. I know that like when our grant review for the PFA grants, there was a very small point, and it seemed appropriate for that. But just wondering, would it be similar for this? A pretty small ranking for if you have a match versus no match. Just wanted to see if there's any discussion on it. I think that would be appropriate, I think, but would want to hear from other folks.
Joe, thank you for bringing that up. I couldn't agree more. In fact, I think it's important that we remain consistent with the way that other projects are evaluated. That'll be another part of a discussion we'll have later, and that was the point Courtney brought up around scoring and the draft scoring language that was provided to us, and that is different than what we're applying to other projects, including water transactions. And is that appropriate? So we'll table that. I do agree that it should be consistent with the other projects, whatever that looks like. I think that's what you're getting at. Does that capture what you're trying to explain?
Yeah.
Great. Sarah, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to flag that another piece that came in the public comments was a request in our guidance document. It states that funds that came from a mitigation payment would not be eligible as match. And that is another thing we've flagged for review from DOJ. Our administrative rules are very clear that PFA grant funds should not be used as mitigation for something else. But it's not clear that a mitigation payment that was made for something couldn't be used as cash match for a PFA funded project. So kind of the other direction of that two-way road. And so we've asked DOJ for clarification on that, and we'll follow up with you all on that when we next time discuss this. Does that make sense?
The question makes sense to ask. I'm not sure if I could say that, one outcome or the other, whether we consider that or not, makes sense. Like you said, need more time to sit with that, and DOJ will have to weigh in, but it's clear to see why you wouldn't want these dollars to be used to mitigate something else when their purpose is specific. So does a payment from a different mitigation outcome used as match run into the same issue, or is it unrelated? And have to sit with that, have to speak to some lawyers and have DOJ weigh in.
Yeah, and from my own experience in the land transaction world, it's very common for mitigation funds to be part of the funding portfolio for conservation easements or for other acquisitions. So I can see why the question was asked of us, and just will make sure you have all the information for your consideration.
That's great, and making sure that it's considered in the context of the goals and outcomes of this program, which are a little unique. And I'm sure every program would say that it's unique. So there's that. Scott, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw an opinion in support of what the example Sarah just provided in terms of allowing other mitigation funds to serve as match, because I don't know what you're seeing up north, but down here, the Archie fire, there was just a huge settlement agreement / mitigation funds that I think if we eliminate the option to use those, we're taking a lot of really potentially good conservation easement projects off the table, because it's almost $200 million worth of projects. And I think they're really struggling to figure out how to spend that wisely. So I don't know if that's similar in other, the 2020 fires up north, but I would just throw that up for consideration.
That's great, Scott. I think it's important to consider. I think it's also important to consider what the purpose of the funding is for. Are those dollars directed to mitigate something other than what we are intended to mitigate with our funds? So would the entire project still count as mitigation for the activities we are trying to mitigate for, if part of that funding is mitigating a different activity or outcome? And again, I think this is where DOJ has to weigh in, and we're going to have to sit with it for a little while to understand if the funding that is provided as match is intended to mitigate something other than our outcomes, then does it still count towards our projects? I know I'm not ready to make a decision on that today. That's a big question. Courtney, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, you keep doing a good job of asking the question in my head, and those are the bits of information I would need to know to make a decision on it. And I think if we ultimately determine that mitigative funds are appropriate for match, I would say language in the direction to applicants should say that we're going to want to have that information when we review. You know, that may be a place where we're going to want to have a better understanding of how those what those match dollars are encumbered to.
Mm-hmm. And I think we also need to think as a committee, if a project has that specific type of match, and that is the only match, well, then it either has match or doesn't, based on this decision. But when we talk about the in-kind and the fact that most every acquisition will have in-kind match, it's not a huge hurdle to say that they're going to get the extra preference because they've provided match. We don't have a threshold of you must provide 10% of the project total cost in match. There's no language like that. So even if a project is mitigating multiple activities, it shouldn't lower their ranking if they're using mitigation funding as part of the total acquisition funding package. But maybe we just don't consider that as a worst case if DOJ weighs in and has a different opinion. It can still be part of the total funding package, but not be what we consider match in order to achieve that preference. It certainly shouldn't disqualify projects because I think we can mitigate multiple activities or outcomes with a single project, depending on the project. Any thoughts? Any other discussion around match? It sounds like we're in agreement that requiring match probably limits our ability to be flexible and limits the number of quality applications we'll see with this project type. So maybe we should just take a vote on this. And I guess we're not making decisions here. This is more of a workshop, so no vote necessary. But Andy, are you at least tracking the discussion so that we can include that in the next version?
Yeah, what I plan to be doing is track changes, and then when we have one final document ready for the solicitation this year, we can kind of move forward at that point. But yeah, I'll be tracking changes for the next moving from today on.
So from this discussion, how are we documenting the discussion around match and where we want to go with that? The recommendation from the committee.
We have meeting minutes that Tiffany works on, but then in addition to that, I will be making revisions that reflect what we're talking about today in track change version of the new guidance moving forward. So all discussions today, any changes to the document will be track change.
Perfect. And then in the track change version, it'll be able to delineate those that came from the discussion today as a committee compared to those that come from individual committee members or the public or external stakeholders or the department, correct?
Yes, I can work on creating a delineation of them.
It would just be helpful to understand, like, are these track changes that the committee already came to an agreement on, or are these track changes from an individual party?
All right, I hear you. Appreciate it.
All right. Next, we've got applicant eligibility. Do you want me to start the discussion on this, Andy? What is the question around?
Well, I'll remind kind of what the committee had. So actually, Chad, you led on this one. It was in terms of nonprofits and if in their definition or in their mission statement, you wanted to make sure they had like, let me pull up. Let me share screen here.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that they have land management in their mission statement for conservation and management of lands, so that you couldn't have, say, a humane society decide that they want to acquire a conservation easement in their backyard. Like, it needs to be someone that can demonstrate that.
And you asked us to check in with DOJ if we can do it. And we did check in with them if we have the authority to limit it, and we do. The committee does have the authority to make a to do that. So I don't know if you wanted to clarify. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just think that we will have a higher quality of application and more likely a successful conservation outcome if we are dealing with nonprofits that it is their mission to acquire and conserve land and interests in land. That's just my opinion and open for discussion. Joe, you've had your hand up first, and then Mark, we can go to you.
Yeah, I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. I think so. I'm just thinking of the organization I work for. We are a conservation group. Our mission is, missions generally are lofty. They can't capture everything an organization does. Our mission is to protect habitats and wildlife in Oregon generally. But we do own properties and we do occasionally acquire properties. So, and we do management on those properties. So I find that problematic, and that there needs that in your assessment, Chad, that there needs to be that statement in the mission, maybe something further down in a greater description of the organization's full suite of what they do. But a mission statement often are, a couple sentences. So you may not capture.
Your mission statement includes protecting land.
I'd need to actually look at it again to be sure. But what criteria were you thinking of, Chad, specifically? Would protecting land be adequate enough, or would it need to be? I guess I would need to get more information on that to learn more about what you're thinking here.
What I'm getting at, Joe, is I would like to make sure that the nonprofits that are applying for conservation easements, that is squarely in their wheelhouse. And so, in my opinion, protect habitat is directly in line with conservation easements. And I know that there are other acquisition programs that do have that requirement and don't seem to have issues with that requirement. The reason that I think it's important is to set up successful applicants that actually have the capacity, the know-how, and expertise to deal with conservation easements, and not a nonprofit that is created for a specific parcel, or a nonprofit that does not have that experience but is interested in trying to get into conservation easements. I'm not firm on this. I just think that having it dedicated to those groups with expertise will lead to better outcomes, but I could be convinced otherwise. And it was just a thought. Mark?
I just to respond to that real quick, if that's okay, Andy and Chad.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's generally okay. I think that we would need to see in writing some type of definition of what would be an eligible NGO or not, based on, and then we would need to agree on that. We would need to review that and agree on that.
Absolutely. And it would probably, to your point, Joe, be helpful if DOJ could weigh in with an example of, if they said we have the ability, what types of things could we ask for or would be defensible?
I don't know if they would weigh in. I mean, we can bring another recommendation forward to them, but I would say that at this point, the committee would want to bring something forward. They just said we have the authority to narrow it. If that helps.
Andy, are you able to look to other land acquisition programs that have that requirement to try to pull language?
I certainly can. Yeah, I can look at it.
Great. Sarah, your hand is up. I know Mark and Courtney have theirs up first. Is it okay to go to Mark and Courtney?
I would just say that there's a statutory definition for conservation easement holders that we can provide.
Thank you.
Awesome. Very helpful. Thank you, Sarah. Mark?
Yeah, I guess it'd be helpful to see what Sarah just referenced, because I was going to say, somewhat seconding Joe's comment, a lot of mission statements won't get into that nitty gritty. I think we want a nonprofit that has something that says their mission or their purpose is to conserve, manage, and protect natural resources. And, in terms of the quality of the applicant, that's one of our scoring criteria. Does the applicant have the capacity and experience to do it? So I agree that we were looking for NGOs that are in the conservation, protection, habitat realm. And sort of to Joe's point, I guess either we see what language is. I would tend to be pretty general about it, or maybe the language Sarah's referencing takes care of it.
Thank you, Mark. Courtney, you've got your hand up, and then we'll go back to Sarah. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Great.
I guess I should have let Sarah say yes. Of course, it's okay for me. So I think I'm trying to get to the root problem we're solving for with this. And in my mind, it's that what makes easements sometimes different about treatments is that the obligation of an easement is perpetual. And so I feel like what we're talking about is that those who are applying, it's not just about whether they can procure it, it's about whether they have the infrastructure of their system to manage it perpetually. And so that normally is not in the mission, it's in the governing documents. And I wonder if that is the friendly amendment, which is that we're looking for this language in their formal governing documents, which might include bylaws or, you know, and I don't know if that's getting to it, but that would be where I would be looking to like Joe's organization to say, well, I can look at their governing documents and see that this is embedded in the structure of the organization. So that's the question I have on it. And that may not be an accurate interpretation of the problem statement either, but.
No, I think you nailed it, Courtney. We just want to make sure that the folks that are successful in the application have the long-term vision that this is what they are going to do, and they're able to do that in perpetuity. That's a very long time. Sarah, you had your hand up.
I think it was just a residual hand from my prior comment, but I can share screen and pull up that definition if you want to dive into that detail now, or we can share it with you later. It's
If you have it handy, you might as well pull it up and we can take a first look.
All right.
And again, there's no decisions being made in this meeting, no votes being taken, so it's fine to look at it. Even if we like it, it'll still go through the process you just laid out, Sarah, where we'll have to approve it later.
So in Oregon Revised Statute 271715, holder is defined in kind of three categories. So it's the state, any county, you can see this here, metropolitan service district, soil and water conservation district, city or park district, county service district established under other statutes. So, a government entity, city, county, local government, or it can be in B, a charitable corporation, charitable association, or charitable trust, the purposes or powers of which include retaining or protecting the natural, scenic, or open space values of real property, assuring the availability of real property for agricultural, forest, recreational, or open space use, protecting natural resources, maintaining or enhancing air or water quality, or preserving the historical, architectural, archaeological, or cultural aspects of real property, or an Indian tribe as defined in ORS 97-740.
Yeah. Well, if that's in statute, then DOJ would probably be fine with that, correct?
That's what they'll go to.
And under this, the entity, corporation, association, or trust, the purposes or powers of which include retaining, and then it says natural resources, including maintaining or enhancing air or water quality. I think that our objectives are captured in this. I think this is more broad than our objectives, but I think it still serves as a first filter. So I would offer the committee to consider this definition, and thank you for finding this, Sarah. It's helpful that it's already in statute.
Happy to provide that link to y'all as well.
Great. Any other discussion on applicant eligibility? Yes, Mark. I see your actual hand up. But you're on mute.
Yeah, that actual language that Sarah just read is in the document that Andy shared with us.
That's correct.
as an eligible applicant. I mean, verbatim, it's there.
Perfect. So any other questions on applicant eligibility? Okay. Andy, do you want to pull up the most current version of the guidance document and we can start to work through that? We've covered these sub-agenda items.
Yes. Yes. Getting there. All right, it should be coming in.
Mm-hmm.
All right. You're not seeing a PowerPoint, right? All right, my PowerPoint.
No, we're seeing the document. We're
All
seeing
right,
the
let me close
document.
my
And Andy, again, on process, we've all seen the document, made some notes on the side. We're going to work through this, and then we are going to submit our notes and comments to you by the end of in about a week's time.
Yeah, if you can
And then
get
we
to
will take
me
that.
by the end of this week, that'd be, or maybe next Tuesday, give the weekend. I'll post them publicly thereafter, and then I'll send a revised draft with track changes. So please use track changes. But I'll post it and then I'll direct email the committee.
And Andy, can I offer a process that ODF has utilized in the past that's been helpful as well? Is that throughout the document, they insert dialogue boxes and it says entity and then reasoning for comment. So
Yes.
you make your comments and then there's dialogue boxes embedded throughout the document. You say who you are and represent. And then in that comment box, you talk a little bit about the why behind the comment.
Yes, so
That
I
can be
think I've
really
done that
helpful
in
purposes.
previous version iterations of this. I have done that. So I'm happy to continue that over into it. This one's not because it was a clean document moving forward. But in previous versions, I've done that where if it was a public comment, I brought over their justification, highlighted the section, and called out the member of the public. Same with the recommendation. If it's made for me, I did have a explanation as to why in it. So I'm happy to continue that moving forward with this document.
Yeah, I just think, what we provide you on the 21st, if there's also that dialogue box that shows who's making the comment and a
Yep.
justification or reasoning,
Of course.
then when you send that all back to us, it helps us have a more informed discussion during our next meeting.
Yep, I will continue the process, moving it over. Happy to keep doing it if that's helpful.
Great. Is that okay with the committee? Is everybody on board with that? I'm not seeing any thumbs down or heads shaking. So we'll go with that.
Yeah, not a problem.
All right, Andy, go ahead and.
All right. Well,
lead us through these.
I think we've kind of talked about the high level things here. I'm scrolling through. I know I highlighted committee discussion points in here. Should align with parties outline the management document. So that's nothing right now. I'm getting to the actual bulk of it. So here's Scott. So Scott's comment asked for this. I gave an explanation. I don't know if we want to go comment by comment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're really bringing it back to May, Scott. You're the first one off the bat there to remember this one.
Nope.
Maybe we got it handled.
Yeah, I don't know if my comment made it. It looks like it was tweaked, but the general intent was, projects must demonstrate meaningful and lasting conservation outcomes and habitat benefits. That's super aspirational, but how do we measure that? Is that 100 yards of habitat? Is that 10 miles? I mean, what does that mean? It seemed really subjective, and so I thought we maybe should put some different sideboards on it, or think a little bit more about the wording there.
Yeah, Scott, I think that the comment or the language here is just to demonstrate that they're in line and supporting the incidental take permit and the HCP and those covered species, that they provide uplift to the covered species in order to be eligible. And if they don't, then they're ineligible. So if you have any suggestions on language that is less lofty, but still gets the essence of these projects must provide the uplift in order to be eligible, I think that would be fine.
Okay.
I would almost add also in our the conservation easement template, it talks about conservation goals. That's what I believe it's called. So that's going to get communicated in there also.
Okay, there's a sentence at the bottom of that paragraph too that falls under that same category. You know, proposals should demonstrate the return on investment and justify why it's the best value. Again, that I'm not sure I'd know what to do with that if I were an applicant. How do I demonstrate that my project is more competitive than the next one? What are we looking for there? So, but I think, you know, hearing you, Chad, this sounds more like, all right, an applicant should give this some thought. There's really not metrics they should add here.
Overarching.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Courtney, you've got your hand up, and then Bill, I see you've got your hand up next.
Yeah, as I was thinking about reading Scott's comment and thinking about this, and as a reviewer that doesn't sit in the same technical seat that Scott, like you have in the past, what I am imagining is that an easement is a tool, but is not a piece of paper is not ultimately what creates uplift. So for me, it's understanding how the project is demonstrating how the creation of this easement is enabling other things to happen and what those other things are, which means what's the baseline kind of ecological condition, and then how does that easement create an anticipated future condition, and then what mechanism is happening to get to that future condition that the easement is enabling. And so because I'm not in the weeds on it quite at the same technical level, I guess I just am looking for what's happening in addition to an easement that's creating the future condition.
Yeah, and I think some of your earlier comments, Courtney, alluded to this, but I think this will all probably shake out in the scoring when we talk about it as a group, you know, in our face-to-face. I'd be curious though, you know, since we have some of those public folks on the call, perhaps still on the call, the Colt folks, and maybe even Mark Redmember, how, you know, how they looked at this in the past projects, just kind of share from their experience.
Yeah, before we go to the public, I want to make sure that Bill has a chance to weigh in.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. I think my comments are along very similar line to other folks here, is that these conservation easements are supposed to do good things as identified by the HCP. So, you know, the goals and objectives of those easements should directly match to something in the HCP, which ultimately provides that uplift and that benefit that Courtney was talking about. So maybe it's as simple as either here or in that application template, highlighting which components of the HCP this project is specifically going to address, and make that connection very crystal clear, to get at what Scott Lightcap's asking, which is how do we know that we're doing good things? Well, the HCP defines what's a good thing. So I just wanted to offer that comment.
Yeah, I think that's helpful context. And for example, excluding cattle from riparian areas to reduce sedimentation, there's probably a few ways that you could get at that. And maybe in some instances, a conservation easement is the easiest or most efficient way to do that. Another thing that we could consider is development, right? So if you're talking about development, riparian adjacent development on agricultural lands, they could install green water infrastructure. They could have all different types of mitigation measures that are more costly than just conveying the development rights through a conservation easement. And there's another example of how it would be a better value and a better investment to have a conservation easement on that property than to go through with development and put in all these other mitigations. That's where my head is at, but I might be way off base. Any other discussion? I'm looking online. I do not see Colt on the call.
We have Mark. Mark came on camera, Chad, for the response, I believe. I think there was a question.
Mark, which Mark?
Mark Hudson. I thought someone asked a question to Mark Hudson to clarify something. I could have been incorrect.
Yeah, Scott asked if Colt had any experience in that.
I mean, if there's room for public comment at the end, perhaps they can weigh in and share how they value or evaluate one project over another when they're both are put before them. I'd just be curious how they tackle that.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Mark's working in capacity with Colt. I could be incorrect.
I am also, I didn't introduce myself as such, but I'm the government relations chair for Colt as well. And Carson did. Carson had a double. It had overlapping meetings and asked me to step in at this point. So I can't answer that question if now is the appropriate time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're like anybody. We're looking, I have more projects than I can fund. We're doing kind of comparative analysis on the easement side all the time. One of the big ones being there's a lot of metrics by which we compare feasibility, but the biggest one is going to be lift or impact to the conservation values, as we put it. I think, Chad, you gave a pretty good example there of like one demonstrated way that conservation easements can have an enduring impact, which is excluding cattle from riparian areas. And the way it kind of works contractually in that example is the easement will say you will exclude cattle from riparian areas. We might use a buffer distance, we might use some other metric written into the contract agreement itself. And to our mind, that does create lift, right? Because now we have a legal standing to say, however you want to achieve that, they might do hard fencing, they might do some of the new electronic fencing, so on and so forth. That is a requirement going forward. You typically with easements, the method of restoration is not necessarily wrapped into the easement, although oftentimes we are doing contractual agreements with landowners for match funding or cost share funding support for them to help achieve that, but not all the time. Sometimes the landowners are just going to do it themselves. Are they either out of the proceeds of the easement sale or with other resources? Another good example I think that might work for the PFA is water rights are a pertinent right associated with land, so they can also be modified by conservation easement. And so, for example, we might ask them to reduce water use by doing kind of a more efficient irrigation system or change irrigation timing, and all those things are monitorable conditions which can have a lift to covered species, right, in and of themselves. So easements don't, I think, to Courtney, your point, effectuate direct restoration, but by excluding or modifying habits by the agreement, you can get restoration outcomes. And so at the end of the day, we're still outcome focused. Where is this going? And I think probably too, because in the case of our land trust, we do both land management, restoration, and acquisition. When we're looking at the split between resources, the big difference is that the easement's an enduring condition that we know is going to be staying on the land, while the land management and restoration stuff is kind of limited with private landowners to whatever the time period of the contract agreement is. That might be 20 years. Some of the funding, once the restoration work is done, there is no enduring agreement, right? And so all those things get taken into factor and kind of get weighed out. Sometimes it's pretty scientific. Sometimes it's just kind of we take all of our experts in a room and we kind of argue with each other and decide which one gives the greatest outcome.
Great. Very helpful. Thank you, Mark. Did that get at your question, Scott? Great. Jock, you've got your hand up, and then we will continue through the document.
Okay, I just thinking in terms of all this discussion about accepted practices. I'm sure we have somewhere a whole bunch of accepted practices. So if somebody's going to do an application, they there's it shouldn't be too hard to justify it. That's all.
That's great, Jock. Thank you for that. And we will see if we have those listed as we get deeper into the document. So, Andy, I think we just passed my request around the language think we're in a good spot with that.
Yep. We are prepared. Sarah got some slides on riparian definition. That's kind of next in the docket here. If Chad, if we want to revisit that, we have the different definitions.
Sure.
Okay. Sarah, did you want to share your screen or me mine? Whatever works.
I'm happy to share.
All right. Let me get off it. All right.
Just in the spirit of a good work session, we were back here furiously just throwing some things together. So are you seeing my
Yep,
slides?
we got it.
In this document that Andy was just sharing, this is the way we had riparian defined. So it was in the context of conservation easements on land other than forest land to protect, maintain, and restore and enhance the form and function and ecological processes of the riparian areas for the benefit of the covered species. So then what do we mean by riparian areas? In the draft, we had it defined as the area adjacent to a river, lake, or stream, consisting of the area of transition from an aquatic ecosystem to a terrestrial ecosystem. And that was referring to, Andy, was that the DLCD definition? Yeah. So that was referring to the DLCD definition, Department of Land Conservation and Development. But there are other definitions out there. ODF, as was brought up earlier, forestry's definition is the ground along a water of the state where the vegetation and microclimate are influenced by year-round or seasonal water, associated high water tables, and soils which exhibit some wetness characteristics. There's also, I will land on a slide that has all of them, so you don't have to memorize as I go through these. There's also a definition that ODFW has in one of our tax incentive program administrative rule sets. And that's our RL tip, as we call it. The riparian land means land situated along the bank of a stream, characterized by vegetation and microclimate, influenced by perennial and or intermittent water normally associated with high water tables and or hydric soils. This area must be sufficient to support conservation or management measures identified in the riparian management plan and agreement. So that's getting into some specifics of that rule set, but you can see how these all kind of have like elements that are potentially helpful or potentially not helpful to us. You know, water of the state, is that necessary? Along the bank of a stream, that's pretty narrow, but the mention of hydric soils, potentially helpful. So it's like we have the number, we can borrow from any of these as we'd like to, I believe. In some internal staff conversations, Bill, you were involved in some of these too. We took a look at all of those options of the administrative rules of the different agencies, as well as our own ODFW State Wildlife Action Plan, where there's a big lengthy section talking about the characteristics of riparian areas, and kind of landed on this definition that could be useful for the purposes of this guidance document, which is that riparian areas are transition zones from upland to aquatic ecosystems where plant assemblages and communities are influenced by year-round or seasonal surface water and elevated groundwater tables. These zones buffer inputs to the aquatic system, cycle nutrients, and provide habitat for aquatic and terrestrial species. Just another offer. We also saw in public comment from Colt a working definition for our consideration as well. Riparian areas are the area predominantly defined by being adjacent to a river, lake, stream, or other water body, which provides permanent or temporary habitat for a covered species, with a clear hydrological connection to that water body by superficial connection or sheet flow, wherein the legal use of could create a potential harm to the covered species, or the conservation and restoration of would provide significant benefit to those same covered species. So here's the kind of compilation of at least the options we've gathered thus far for your digestion. I would suggest that you not try to make a decision on any definition today, but just take time to discuss, digest, think about it. Maybe give some feedback to Andy when you send in your comments on the document. Happy to send, I'll have Andy send out these slides to y'all when the meeting's done.
Thank you, Sarah. Courtney, you've got your hand raised.
I appreciate the encouragement not to have to make decisions on this today. I think I would incredibly strongly caution us to think about creating new definitions in addition to all the existing statutory definitions already on the books. And so I'm just going to put that position on the table early. And so I appreciate that you've included statutes I think in the ODF and W tentative recommendation. I guess this feels a little bit like maybe a bit of a Frankenstein of multiples, which can then become its own new definition. So that's where my discomfort is in creating a whole nother one that folks have to go find and figure out where it fits.
Yeah, and we mentioned at the beginning of the meeting that part of why we were holding off was just to get a little bit more guidance from DOJ on whether us creating a new definition would cause any issue with other established administrative rule definitions. And the preliminary feedback from our attorney, Aaron Donald, was that as long as you had the caveat up front that this definition is for the purposes of this grant program, you're probably okay. But she was going to take a closer look at it. So we're still awaiting that feedback.
And
But
Sarah,
your position is well taken.
Prior to sending this to the committee, can you change the DLCD riparian definition where it says the area of, it currently says transaction. I think that is supposed to say transition.
Yeah, thank you.
On the third slide, yeah. I think you had it right on the first one, but it's this one, yeah. Hardly the worst autocorrect mistake. You should see my text. Anyway, Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a brief comment. I sort of agree with Courtney. We got enough definitions on hand. I think one of the existing ones probably worked, but Sarah, if you and staff want to create a new one that works specifically for this program, that's fine. But I think it'd be great, Sarah, if you and Andy also recommended ones, because you all are going to have to live with that definition. So I'd give you that. We can respond to it. If you ask the 7 of us for an opinion, you might get 7 different opinions. So
I will say I did like the original DLCD riparian definition, given that the Department of Land Conservation and Development is probably going to be involved in some way, or would have been, if we're talking about potential development and a conservation easement used as a tool to convey that development right. For what it's worth, I do like that definition, but there may be some problems with that definition that I'm not aware of. It doesn't feel overly restrictive, but maybe it is. Jock, you've got your hand up.
Whoops.
And Jock,
now I'm mute. In engineering, they have a saying that I think applies here. Keep it simple, stupid. KISS. The DLCD is the simple.
Great. Thank you for that, Jock. I think that probably wraps up our discussion around the definition for riparians. Sarah, thank you for pulling this together. That's pretty incredible that you pulled the 7-slide deck together in that amount of time, but thank you for that. It'll be helpful as we consider the different definitions. Mark, you've got your hand up, and then we can go back to Andy to work through the rest of the document.
Yeah, I guess the other comment I have about eligible land and riparian, and I wrote it in a previous draft, and I think Andy brought it up there, but it's just acknowledging that the perimeter boundary of a conservation easement for riparian areas, the main purpose and function should be for the riparian purposes. But in terms of practicality on the landscape, I think we want to give the applicant, the department, and the landowner the ability to craft a boundary that makes sense on the ground, whether it's an existing fence line, an existing ridge line, where a road is, whatever that may be. But I think ultimately this conservation easement becomes a management unit. So it should be attuned to how it lays on the ground as well, which may mean it includes an upland here or a rock face there or some other pasture here or there. And I'm not saying this to be expansive. I'm just saying it to be practical and efficient in managing the easement. And I would defer to the applicant, the department, to work together to figure out what that looks like in any particular case.
That makes sense, Mark. I mean, I've been involved in several of these transactions, and then not one of them did we just take a crane and say it's in here. It has to follow legal descriptions, lot lines, and things that can be described in the legal system. So I do think we should look at making provisions that allow for that, even if a little bit of upland is included, because you have to follow the property boundary. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Again, the focus though is to protect and conserve the riparian areas so that they can perform the ecological functions that we've described so far. Is there any hesitation from the committee on that? Just expanding the area to be in conformance with the existing legal lot lines and land use systems? It looks like that is worth including in the edits there, Andy.
I guess I had a question on that, Chad, if it's okay, and maybe, I don't know if this is for Mark Grenbeamer, but I'm thinking about where someone is proposing a conservation easement on a portion of their property, and maybe they're carving out certain areas where they know they are likely to build a structure at some point and they don't want it included in the conservation easement. Those scenarios must exist not on lot, like recorded lot lines, or are they? Am I making sense?
I understand the scenario, but I don't know the exact response. I'd have to do a little bit of consultation about the lot line, how that falls. But yeah, I mean, we've had projects with LWeb where, you know, specific area set aside, other activities, lot development is happening outside of that easement area. So
Okay, we just flag it for follow-up.
Yeah. And then there's different types of easements, right? Going back to the cattle exclusion as a term of the easement. And easements can be, as we all know, you can really do whatever you want. It's just a legal instrument to make it real. And if you're excluding cattle from the riparian area, that would not prevent you from building a pole barn further up on the same parcel. It's just that within that parcel, no cattle can be within the riparian area. I also want to make sure that we aren't overthinking this and getting too prescriptive to where we end up with unintended consequences because we tried to think of every scenario and develop a rule for it. So I do think we can take the conversation into consideration. Andy, you've got it in the minutes. We can follow up with the example that Sarah provided, and Mark, maybe you've got some colleagues at OWEB that could help provide some resources there and bring that back in our next meeting. Does that make sense for folks? Does that work for you, Sarah? Great. Okay, Andy, I think we are ready to scroll down to the next section.
All right, we're in the next section here, right after riparian definitions. We're going back to Scott for the first comment here, Scott.
I must have had a lot of coffee that morning. I don't know. Yeah, I think my thinking here was we might be leaving some opportunities for a synergistic effect. I mean, I think we've always approached projects like this that they do have to stand on their own merits, but looking around at other agencies that have focused investments like OWEB, perhaps we could, reward's not the right word, but just give a nod to a phased project by 1 point or no points. Is it part of a phased effort? 1 for yes, 0 for no. It's not a lot of points, but 2 projects that are 100% equal, the one that's part of a phased project that could synergistically improve a watershed would get the nod in that case. And so that's just something, food for thought for the group.
That's a good comment, Scott. I guess my initial thoughts are that each phase should be able to stand alone because funding of the first phase is no guarantee of funding of the second phase.
Agree.
And if the restoration or the uplift is contingent on the second phase and the first phase is just laying the groundwork for the outcome, then without that second phase and no guarantee of it, kind of tough to justify why that would rank higher than something that are other projects that are required to show and demonstrate that uplift. And maybe that comes out in the scoring, but I think it's still important to have each phase stand alone and provide some level of uplift.
I do agree. Maybe I'm not hearing what you're saying, Chad, but I agree they should stand on their own. They shouldn't get a pass just because they're phase 2. But perhaps there is some recognition of the value of, instead of random shotgun acts of restoration, a really focused approach to restoration in a watershed might, again, like the salmon superhighway is another example of, they put a lot of focus in one area and projects were given a lot of extra oomph because of that, if they were in that area. So just a thought. Again, I'm not wedded to it. I just wanted to throw it out for discussion.
Yeah. Would you be comfortable saying that would come out in the scoring and discussion, that if it's part of building on a larger effort and there's more conservation outcome with that larger effort, then it would naturally just get scoring higher? Or are you suggesting that we put that in writing in phased projects here?
It may require some kind of modification of our current scoring system to better get at that. I'm trying to think which portion of our scoring where that would get teased out. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to labor over it right now. It's just something, if folks think there's merit, I'm happy to chat further on it.
I think where it would come out would just be in the conservation uplift, as you would then be able to have that narrative of this builds on work that's been done and it's a continuation of that work.
Okay.
You've got your hand up, and then we'll go to Mark Granbremer.
Yeah, I think what Scott Light kept bringing up may be partially addressed by this the sentence that follows here. The advisory committee and ODF&W may consider progress and grantee performance on previously funded phases when making decisions on current proposals. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. So it seems to me the only question that would come up would be when you have that initial proposal to get a project off the ground. If those projects are already going towards phase 2, 3, or 4, you have that previous work that you can then make that assessment on. However, if you're making a judgment call on phase 1, knowing there's following phases after that, that's where what I think Scott's bringing up would come into play. So I really just wanted to highlight this sentence after the comment that I think partially addresses the topic.
Yeah. Great comment. Thank you, Bill. Mark Grimberman.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think we're maybe confusing what we mean by phased. And when I think of phased, I think, very specific parts of one project. We'll go in and we'll, remove on this property, we'll do X, and then next year we'll do Y, and then Z. But I think what we're talking about more is how does the project fit within the context of other restoration activities that are within the watershed? And I think that's a little bit different than the phase, because the easement or acquisition could be just another piece in a larger restoration puzzle that may or may not be being accomplished by the applicant for the easement grant. And so I think in the review, looking at how the project fits within the context or restoration momentum going on around it is an important thing to look at, and it's slightly different than what I would think of as a phased project.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Mark. And reading this through more, I think that's helpful clarification. Courtney, you've got your hand up, and then after Courtney, Andy, I'd like to go to the scoring criteria. It's been brought up a couple different times, and I think it's worth in our last 15 minutes talking about what the current scoring criteria proposed looks like, and if the committee is behind that or we'd like to see changes. So Courtney, go ahead with your comment.
Well, I think it's a little bit of response to Mark's comment there. And what I think of is how a project sits in the system versus a phase. And then what I think of is like the but for argument. But for this easement acquisition, or but for this activity, we could not accomplish this uplift outcome. And so when I think about what you just put forward, which was maybe that this easement acquisition could occur in isolation because it is part of a larger system of activities, which is maybe different than a phase, I'm questioning the but for argument. Does that mean this easement is necessary for that uplift outcome? And while I think easements are good and can be a broad tool, this program is narrow intentionally with limited funds. And so I guess that's where I'm less clear on this section about thinking through phases versus its role in a system of things and the necessity of it.
Yeah, I was trying to differentiate between the two, because in the conversation I heard us talking about both phased, which I think meets this definition, as well as more just how a project fits within the puzzle pieces of other work that's going on. And so I think we were talking that I just wanted to make sure that those things, two different ideas, weren't being melded into one, because they are different.
And just to clarify,
we're talking about it as acquisition as a step in a planned phased body of work, whether the first phases happened before we got here or whether they are a future state plan to happen by this organization.
Yeah, and not all projects may be phased when they come to us. That's
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the important thing here is that the phases each stand alone, and so that you aren't relying on a next phase in order to achieve the conservation uplift. Because if we invest in a conservation easement that does not provide the uplift, but it allows for the future phase to do so, then if that future phase never happens, for whatever reason, the conservation easement didn't serve the uplift on its own. And if it can serve the uplift on its own as part of a phased project, then that's great and should be considered in. And if it doesn't, then we get into this situation.
I'll submit some comment. I had drafted some response comment to Scott's comment that I'll share in my red lines with my why statement.
Yeah,
I'm sure
this is interesting because, I had a picture in my mind, and clearly everybody's got their own picture of what that phrase means. But like the version I was picturing was, okay, the land trust is working with 3 different landowners. Each one of those is a phase of their larger scale project in watershed X. And so to achieve the uplift, you really want to get all 3. Each project is great on its own, but you need, there's nuances with each landowner because there's different legal documents and all the stuff we've already discussed. And so that's why I thought, oh, maybe there should be some benefit given to, hey, we've already got landowner 1 on board. Maybe landowner 2 should get a point for their project versus this other one in a completely different watershed, because yes, that's good. It stands on its merits, but it's not a synergistic add like this landowner 2 wouldn't be. That's where I was going in my head. And sorry to confuse this all.
Oh, no problem, Scott. It's helpful to have the discussion because we're able to then differentiate. What do we mean when we say phased project? Is it part of a larger effort in an area, or is it a phased project because that specific project is too large to accomplish start to finish?
Yeah.
Are we comfortable with where we're at on this currently and ready to move to looking at the scoring criteria? All right. Well, let's do that. We have about 10 minutes left in the meeting, and I want to make sure that we get to that piece. I don't think would have made it through the rest of that document anyway. So maybe we can make it through the scoring criteria. And the reason I'm asking you to bring this up, Andy, is that it was my understanding in our prior meeting that we were going to continue to score all the projects on a similar set of criteria. And when we had the water rights acquisitions come through, that's how we treated that, so that we are comparing projects against the same set of standards and the uplift they provide to the covered species. This draft language is a different set of criteria with different scores and different language. Can you explain how we got here? And then we can have a discussion as a committee if this is the direction we want to go, or if we would like to go similar to what we did with water rights, where we're evaluating all projects on the same criteria.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. It's just how the discussion. I was under the assumption that was just for water transactions to be combined. If I'm mistaken, then I'm mistaken. But my assumption was that was relating just to water transactions, that we were going to combine the scoring. This is the new funding pathway, and I didn't think we had that discussion yet. This is up for discussion with the committee, though, of course, and how you guys want to feel. Same thing as when we did with water transactions.
Courtney, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I figured it's only fair that I kind of share since I put this on the bulleted list. And I appreciate that we were just discussing it in that moment. So now for the discussion of it now, I think that the way in which we've been scoring has been about outcome goals, which has made it I think more effective for us to compare apples and cucumbers and carrots through through a consistent. I mean, we talk about things apples and oranges, like these are all very unique treatments and tools, but they are all intended to create the same outcome, uplift outcomes. And so what I like about our current scoring is that it has given us that ability to talk about the outcomes generated, and those are consistent. And as I kind of looked backwards at our past scoring, I couldn't in my head work through how we would have a problem scoring an easement transaction in some of these. And in cases where we might, I would rather look at adjusting the scoring criteria consistently if we need to adjust like criteria category language. I would rather do it consistently across all categories of applications.
Yep. Thank you for that, Courtney. Looking through this current version, whether the applicant has the capacity and writes a clear technical document carries the same weight as the conservation value and ecological uplift. That was also brought up in the public comment, and from my perspective, that's not appropriate. But if we were to evaluate these projects in the same manner that we do the water rights and the restoration actions, to Courtney's point, maybe it's not a perfect fit but I think I would rather work on that language than to create a separate pathway for a new application type. This is giving 10% score to contribution to landscape connectivity. There's discussion of water rights in here. I just personally think that we would be better served to have all project types evaluated based on the outcomes, as Courtney has said, rather than different pathways for different project types. Mark, you had your hand up. I see it's down now. Do you still have your comment?
Yeah, mine's pretty brief. I agree with what you just said. For me, it would be easier to keep using the existing criteria we have so that all projects are really evaluated through the lens of what's their conservation uplift. And I think the question about capacity and qualifications of the applicant is asked in our current set of criteria and can be looked at through that lens to see if it's an organization capable of managing an easement as well.
Yeah. Scott, you've got your hand up.
I think I agree with everything that's been said regarding trying to use the existing scoring criteria. But I guess my question was, is there room to do a pretty thorough revamp of that criteria such that, you know, it might fit better for a wider variety, still outcome based. I like that approach, but it seems like there was room, you know, in going through it a couple of years in a row now, there's room to improve or change points, values for different categories. Seems like we've talked about that and really haven't taken the time to do it yet.
Mm-hmm. So Scott, it would be helpful if you have, maybe for the next meeting, you could point out some of those changes that you think would make the current set of criteria more applicable to these types of projects or this project type. Looking at the existing criteria, I'm not seeing anything that would be a barrier for this project type, similar to what we did with the water rights transactions, which are a very different project type, and they were still competitive. So it's my belief that we can allow for that criteria to also be used for these types of projects, and they will still be competitive as long as it's a quality project. I don't think there's anything in there that would disproportionately impact their score to make them less competitive. I do think that we as a committee could look at revising the existing criteria. I'm not sure we have time to do that prior to this year's solicitation. So as a committee, we can make that decision. I would just encourage us to, for Andy's sake, not ask that we complete the rest of this work and review and change the entire existing criteria in time for a solicitation. Andy, it is sounding like that's the way the committee's leaning. We're not making any decisions today, as we've discussed. But would you be able to look at the existing criteria and also look at different components of it that might need to be changed or tweaked if we were to take that approach?
No problem. I can put it in a revised document and combine it for you guys.
That would be great.
No problem.
Courtney, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I know we're trying to wrap, and appreciate that. And I, just hearkening back to some of our review and some of what Scott's saying, I do think as we went through the process this year, I remember multiple times where we were all kind of like, oh, we should make a note. And Andy was taking down notes about areas for kind of better guidance or future improvement, and scoring was a little in that, and I'm just not remembering some of those themes. And so if the thought is this is probably too late in the season for this next cycle, it could be that as we're reviewing in this upcoming cycle, I know for me, if we're going to have a discussion about the scoring weighting and things, I'd probably go into that with an extra kind of lens of writing my own notes on what those points might be, so I remember it better. Because I remember it being there, and it's just not top of mind.
Yeah. And part of what we discussed was in the grant management and grant review software, and the department is going to roll out new grant review processes. So some of those notes were in reference to that. But your comments well made, and it would be helpful to go through a process and be taking notes on how we could make changes for the next process. Andy, you had your hand, but I also want to make sure that in the next couple minutes, we do provide the opportunity for public comment that we had told the public we would do.
Of course. No, just in response to you, Courtney, I appreciate it. As we've worked on this, I've incorporated those comments into the primary solicitation. So I can try to dig up some notes and whatnot. But I do take those notes and I do update it. I've updated the full solicitation based off our meeting this year concurrently with what I'm doing here. So I think it's all doable, what we're talking about here, at least for now. I've been on track and doing it the last few months. So I update the solicitation starting in March, essentially. We don't waste any time with that. So that's why that meeting's so helpful. So I just want to make it heard that I do hear those comments, and they should be in the new one going forward, at least to the breadth of it and how much time we have to discuss the smaller things versus the bigger things. But anyways.
Great. Andy, with that, I'd like to kick it back to open the public comment. Let's have the same 3 minutes available. Apologies to the public for being a little behind schedule, and then we'll go into some housekeeping prior to closing the meeting.
All right, sounds good. Mark Hudson, you got your hand up. I'm gonna go ahead and start your 3 minutes once you come off mute there.
Yeah, I've just been listening in, and I thought, given the conversations, it might be helpful for me to clarify 2 things. I think, Sarah, you had brought up what we call building envelopes, the question of lot lines and the existence of buildings and developments. I would like to say first, we tend to not encourage carve outs for buildings within our conservation easements because you don't know what's going to happen to them going forward. So for example, it might have been a carve out for them to build a house, but later on they do a massive groundwater pumping and it impacts the conservation values in a way that we have no influence over. So we construct building envelopes. Depending on the easement, those might be surveyed. OWEB typically likes them surveyed, but there's not one program's treatment. Sometimes they're just using GIS based boundaries, an acreage limitation, and a notice and approval. So they have to do a survey when they go do it rather than at the time of easement being done to prove that they're otherwise fixing everything. The other question that came up, I think it was from Scott, but it was a big conversation, was how phases work. And I'd say, I think we look them at the same. The committee doesn't want to fund a bad phase and we don't want to hold a bad easement. So to the same extent, if I have a multi-phase easement, I will try to split the easement in a way that there are kind of contiguous and similar conservation values structured in each phase of the easement so that we know that we're getting a good project and that you're funding a good project no matter what goes on, because funding for future phases never guaranteed. So I thought I'd just say that. Also say thank you for all the conversation that you all had today. I think you hit on almost everything that came up in our public comment document that Cole provided. So we really appreciate that. And obviously, Sarah, Andy, you got some more work to do. So thank you for that too.
Thank you, Mark. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to have public comment? Okay. Hearing none, we are a couple minutes behind, but all committee members, please make sure to get the red line versions back to Andy by the 21st. Mark, you've got your hand up real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment, a reflection. We're spending a lot of time talking about conservation easements on riparian areas and agricultural lands. And so I was just going to suggest to Sarah and Andy, if you haven't done so already, it might be worthwhile to reach out to groups like the Oregon Cattlemen's Association and the Oregon Farm Bureau just to make sure they're aware this is going on and let them have an opportunity to make sure it's on their radar screen. Since it's sort of in a forestry world, they may not really be tracking it. So it'd just be good that we cover that base and there's no surprises there.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And I I would just reiterate, we will do that. That's a good suggestion. I would also just reiterate for anyone, any members of the public listening in that we welcome any engagement from interested stakeholders on what we're doing in the grant program, like the production of this guidance document, so that invitation stands across the board for any interested members of the public to reach out to Andy, and we're happy to have any conversations. Thanks.
Thanks for the comment, Mark. I think that's really wise, and thank you for that commitment, Sarah. Appreciate that. I think it does set the whole committee up for success when it goes in front of the commission, and the likely question about who all was contacted about this. Okay, so we will all get our marked up versions back to Andy in a week's time. Andy, you'll send those back out with, are you going to send a version with the dialogue boxes for us to be able to say who we represent and what the reasoning behind the comment was?
Yep, it will be a Word document with all the comments in there. So I'll be copying over the comments directly.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Andy, and thank you for all of your hard work to get this whole new project type. That's a second in 2 years, right? So you've been doing a lot. Thank you for that effort.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. With that, we will close the meeting.
Have a great day, everyone.
All right, thanks all.